Okay, welcome to the Harry Bridges Center for Labor Studies Employment Beyond Academia panel. It's so good to have you all here with us today. Before we get started, I'd like to take a quick moment to recognize sort of the devastating toll the Derek Chauvin trial has taken on Black, Indigenous, and various other communities of color. Given the guilty verdict today, which is the first step in George Floyd's family struggle for justice, we recognize the continued violence and oppression BIPOC communities face. And the Bridges Center stands in solidarity with our BIPOC students and community members against all systems of violence, injustice, and oppression. We remain committed to continuing to provide the support necessary to challenge both capitalist and racist institutions throughout our society. And in terms of our career panel, we're very fortunate to have our esteemed guests with us here today. Allow me to introduce our moderator, John Agnon. John is the Director of People Analytics at Tableau. He previously spent 7 years maturing the People Analytics function at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. John received his PhD in Sociology at the UW in 2010, with his dissertation focusing on the impact of union involvement or union employment on racial wealth disparities. John wears many hats and is affiliated with UW's eScience Institute, the Department of Sociology, the Labor Center, and is the director and co-founder of the Northwest Social Research Group. John has authored multiple scholarly and policy reports on social movements and economic inequality. He's presented to a variety of technical and non-technical audiences and has become enamored with the accessible data science tools to bring human resources information to life for those who do not enjoy torturing data for a living. And so with that, I'll pass it over to John.
Thank you, Riddhi. It's a very, very generous intro. And thanks everyone for joining us, all 52 of you, and for our esteemed panel. So before we get started, just want to let you know I'm joining you, like many of you, from your homes or random places as we deal with the pandemic. So I'm in my hip urban office, AKA my garage. So if you hear neighbors or any other things happening, that's what's going on in the background. But first, I want to thank Riddhi and Andrew for coming up with a great idea for a panel. I've done solo talks like this about non-academic careers with grad students over the last couple of years at Wazoo and at UW. And as a social scientist, an N of 1 is always unsatisfying. So I'm thrilled that we have an N of 5. So, you know, the statistical power is growing. And so just want to, let you know that you can submit questions via the Q&A. There is a button at the bottom that we will get to at the end of the session. And in the meantime, we are going to have each of our 5 panelists answer about 2 or 3 questions to kind of frame their labor market experience and transition from grad school. And so with that, I'm going to jump in and introduce our first panelist. So we are fortunate to be hearing from Ligaya Domingo. Dr. Domingo is currently the Racial Justice and Education Director for SEIU 1199 Northwest. Ligaya served on the executive boards of many things: the National Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance, the SEIU API Caucus, the Washington State Labor Council, and the Martin Luther King County Labor Council. And she currently sits on the Harry Bridges Center for Labor Studies Advisory Committee. And Ligaya got her PhD and master's from the University of California, Berkeley, and is as a random aside, and I don't think she knows this, I was fortunate enough to be presenting at a conference with Ligaya's mom about 15 years ago. So we'll talk about that some other time. But Ligaya, as we tee you up, just want to ask a few questions for you. So first, if you could briefly describe your career journey from graduate school to your current role, to kind of give a sense for how that experience went for you transitioning from grad school to the labor market.
Great. I've had many lives already, and I'm not even 45 yet. I would say that in many ways, my journey started when I started undergrad. In many ways, I would say that I have walked kind of a not normal path sort of since the beginning. And so as an undergraduate student, I had actually gotten involved with the Labor Center. At the time, sort of after my first year of college, I decided that I wanted to become a union organizer. And so I had developed a relationship with Margaret Levy in the Center for Labor Studies, and she was really a guide and mentor for me in both my career and academic pursuits. And so I worked for a number of years previously as a union organizer, and then finished my BA, and then at a certain point decided to become a teacher. So I first got a master's in teaching, became a teacher, and then I became sort of dissatisfied pretty quickly with being a teacher and decided to go to grad school. And so when I was in grad school, I was definitely one of those people that I'm sure you all know who was like, I'm going to be an academic and I'm presenting at every single conference and I'm going to do every single thing perfectly. And it's going to set me up for this great career trajectory. And at the time that at Berkeley, you have to do an oral examination before you do your dissertation research. And so I know that's different, I think mostly at the UW. But so as I was doing my dissertation research, I'd moved back to Seattle. And so my dissertation research was all done here, qualitatively, mostly oral history. And I got back involved with a lot of organizations that I had been involved with. And so when I was thinking about kind of my story, I think that that's something that I really want to highlight is kind of how important the relationships that we forge while we're in grad school are just really important for our future, whether we're going to go an academic route or not. You know, for our research, we need to have those relationships anyway. And so I think that that was a major takeaway for me. And so I had a very multidisciplinary program that I, essentially built for myself. I was in a school of education, but I took courses and had dissertation. I had two chairs, one that was in my department and one that was in the School of Sociology, but I also had folks from ethnic studies and who had labor specialization also on my committee. And so when I was finishing, I applied for several years for academic positions, and the economy had tanked. And I was pregnant with my second child, and my husband lost his job. And it was clear that this vision of the future I had had for myself was not going to probably come to fruition. And so luckily I had all of these relationships that I had been building during grad school. And, I had worked previously as an organizer, and I was able to very easily get a job back with the union that I had previously worked for. And so when I first took the job, though, I was like, this is a contract position. I'm only going to stay here for a year. I kept applying for academic jobs for many years. And I found that I was happy doing what I was doing. And I found a way to do the things that I thought I wanted to do in an academic career in the job that I was in. And so I think that that was kind of a key for me, was staying grounded in what it was that I really wanted to do, and found a place through which I could still do that, even if it wasn't in the academy. And I'm just about to publish my first piece, actually. And so I'm like maintaining academic ties in different ways and finding ways to still do the things that I wanted to do outside of the academy. So I think that's my story.
That's awesome. Thanks, Ligaya. And so a couple of follow-up questions. how would you recommend grad students frame their academic work experience for the non-academic labor market based on your experience?
So I think it's really important to think, ahead of time about how to ground your work within the community in whatever way that might look. And so I think that can become an easier pathway to a non-academic position if you're thinking about, okay, well, how might my work actually relate in the real world, and how can I be in collaboration or community with folks outside of the academy, so that something like a non-academic job trajectory could easily kind of manifest. I think that if I hadn't done that, it would have been much, much harder. I did try to apply for some other kinds of jobs that I didn't have those relationships, and I think what I learned was just how critical those relationships and ties were ahead of time, whether it was like, volunteering or, kind of, it feels like, oh gosh, I have to go back to all that stuff I knew before, maybe before grad school, if you had taken time before undergrad. But I think, just trying to have some sort of tie outside of the academy is really, really important.
Awesome. Thanks, Ligaya. And there was at least one question in the Q&A that you can check out and answer directly, or that we'll follow up at the end. And so I'm gonna move on to our next panelist. Thank you, Ligaya. I'm now going to introduce Tyler Corwin. Tyler began his career with the Casey Family Program based in Seattle, which is a nonprofit, while he was completing his master's degree in sociology at the University of Washington. He then went on to work full-time for the Casey Foundation before accepting a position as a senior policy analyst with the Seattle Jobs Initiative in 2013. And Tyler now works in the King County Department of Community and Human Services Performance Measurement and Evaluation Unit. Tyler, could you get a longer job title or a place that you work? My goodness. And he continues to work as a behavioral health evaluation lead. So Tyler, thank you for joining us. And for everyone's benefit, beyond what I just explained, could you just discuss your career journey from grad school to your current role?
Yeah, certainly. It is a long department, and I don't even think I included the entirety of it. So thanks for the introduction and the opportunity. As I was completing my master's degree, I had fulfilled my minor exam requirements through the Center for Statistics and Social Sciences, but I had a pretty strong sense that I wasn't gonna go on to complete my major examination to pursue a PhD. So I started to really assess every listserv job posting that involved social research that came across my desk or via email, preferably paid opportunities, no matter how small. And during my last year or two of graduate school, I really started picking up piecemeal consulting work here or there, basically acting as a paid research assistant in a number of capacities, be that in post-secondary education, workforce development, law enforcement, parenting. And what I found was that the graduate school and the graduate programs that we're enrolled in are really tapped into a lot of fields, and many organizations outside of academia actually look to graduate programs for assistance and for help with their workforce. So in my final year of graduate school, there was a listserv posting on SocialGrads, which was for graduate students at Casey Family Programs. And it was primarily for data entry and data cleaning. The pay was okay, but they needed a lot of hours. And while the work was beneath my skill level, it was in a research department and it was at a national nonprofit foundation. So I basically used that opportunity to get my foot in the door. And then as I was doing the tasks assigned, I also contributed background research in preparing articles for peer-reviewed journals and publication, I demonstrated, that I could run statistical analyses, and really started to demonstrate my value beyond the job that I was hired for. And so after that, after my status as a graduate student intern sort of ran up, I was hired on as a consultant. This was 2009, 2010, so the recession was in full force and the job market was super tight. So I continued to leverage consulting opportunities and consulting experience essentially until they morphed into job prospects. I was gaining experience, which I cannot underestimate the value of experience in non-academic settings or outside of the classroom is very different in terms of the deliverables that you're expected to produce, expectations and timelines, how you interact with colleagues, what workplace culture looks like, supervising people. It's a very different context. And so any experience that you can gain even while in graduate school to be able to put that on your resume, put that on your CV, I think will benefit you in the job market, certainly. And that's really sort of tied to the second question about how to frame one's non-academic experience as well. What I found is that a lot of the research assisting that I was doing while tied to academia, I was doing a lot of it outside of the classroom. And so there was a real practical application to a lot of the skills that I was using in graduate school, but in a more non-academic workplace, tangible, use whatever term you want, setting. And so really being able to show that you can apply the technical skills, apply the proficiencies that you've gained in academia, but apply them in a non-academic setting, I think was really helpful in obtaining some of those smaller consulting opportunities, which I then sort of leveraged into a career. The last question around building relationships, I am not great at networking naturally. I know Dr. Agnon and others on this call probably are. Some people are much more adept at chatting people up and asking about their work and establishing those connections. I don't think I'm one of those people. And so harkening back to what Dr. Domingo was saying, maintaining those relationships with your peers from graduate school, relationships with professors, small consulting opportunities or research assistantships that can then be called upon as need be subsequently. I think that's actually really critical. Even in my job now at the county, I've been approached by people that are finishing up their master's degrees or their doctorates, just asking for coffee or an informal interview, what it's like to work for King County, what it's like to work for government or a nonprofit. And frankly, some of those informal interviews have turned into jobs for folks working at the county because they may have interviewed with me and they may or may not have gotten a job on my team, but via the interview process, via that informal coffee, I can then point to that person if they interview for a different job in a different department and say, yeah, I met that person. They seemed really great. They weren't the right fit for my team, but having spoken with them about their skills, I think they'd be a great fit, for the position. So that would be my primary advice is really maintaining those connections and how you can apply your academic skill set in the non-academic setting.
Thanks, Tyler, and thanks for stealing my thunder on all the follow-up questions. And the one thing that Tyler mentioned, which I just want to echo since we have another like 30-40 seconds before our next panelist, for a lot of us in grad school, we're in grad school because the idea of like what we consider more networking is like that type of like hand holding, glad handing is like very anathema to many of us. And so I know that's not something that comes naturally. And so I think, Tyler, you spoke to a couple ways that like it can occur more organically without you feeling like you're doing things that are against what you believe in doing, right? So I think that's super helpful. So thanks, Tyler. Gonna move on to our next panelist, Peter Graham, who received his master's in sociology from the University of Washington. Peter has, I think, had a cup of coffee in every part of state government in Olympia, sometimes 2 cups of coffee. Peter started out as a research analyst for the Washington State Department of Corrections, He then moved over to the Office of Financial Management, where he was a budget analyst, and before returning to corrections to head up their data analytics unit. And then at that point, he started consulting with other state agencies to show them how to use data to make decision-making, to inform decision-making. And for the last nearly 5 years, he's been with the Department of Social and Health Services, DSHS. And I'm really excited to hear from Peter about his experience with his career journey and how he got into his current role. So Peter, the mic is yours.
All right, thanks. I should have asked to go first because I always like setting that bar really low for the rest of the panelists. Yeah, so I would like to say that like Tyler or the past panelists that, I had this really strong desire to finish my PhD, get my doctorate. That was a thought in my mind, but my family decided to have a baby and okay, we needed money for that. So after I graduated, it was the recession. So we moved in with my parents down in Olympia, and Olympia is the heart of state government down here. So threw out a bunch of applications. And this will be a theme I'll kind of keep going back to, but state government is a huge behemoth of bureaucracy, does not have the best technology, does not have the best employees. There's a whole host, it doesn't have the best funding. There's a whole host of problems, but what it does have is like people who really want to accomplish something good. And so you're surrounded by people who are trying really hard to accomplish something. Even in corrections, I was surprised by how much I was surrounded by people who wanted to change corrections from this kind of this law enforcement to more of a social work environment. And so, I took the first job, and it was a pretty direct route from kind of research sociology into a research assistant, research analyst with corrections, researching data. And what I found is, and what I continue to find is there's very few people in state government who can actually understand academic research. There are great pockets of smart, talented folks within state government who have strong connections with, the universities, research centers, but from a day-to-day operations of DSHS, Department of Corrections, data and research they're not looking for these 3 to 4 to 5 year research studies. They're looking for, hey, what happened yesterday? And so I was able to apply the skills I picked up in the sociology department and did some really what I thought were basic analysis, and it blew people's minds. Having an Excel sheet that you can interact with and toggle something on and off in Excel, I think that got my first 2 promotions at corrections. And I would like to say it's just corrections, because corrections is kind of like corrections. But even at the Department of Social and Health Services, it's amazing how we have so many program staff, not very many data or policy people involved. So that I moved up pretty quickly from kind of just making Excel like analysis, mean, median, mode. Like that was a big hit. But then it turned into modeling, budget models, legislative models to say, hey, if we make this policy change, how many inmates will that impact? How many clients will that impact? How much will that cost? And building models like that, then I feel like that's where the skills that you can pick up in any of the programs, realistically, any grad student most likely has the skills to succeed in state government. I'm assuming any public government setting, in most jobs, to be honest. And then that just led me to, start doing kind of budget building for the governor. And John, I really haven't had that much coffee with people around the state. It's just, it's such a small world that once you build a model in corrections, that actually led to me building models for a budget build for the governor. And that led me to building now Medicaid rate models for the Aging and Long-Term Services Administration. So that's how I got to my position now, is that kind of emphasis on the data and the analysis. I will say that, jumping onto that next question, I know I'm starting to bounce all around, again, low bar. If you have any sort of technical background, the challenge will be you're either finding a career that parallels that exactly, and you need to hit on those terms, those skills exactly. But I could not go into state government and start talking about the statistical courses I took or what sociological theory classes I was aware of. But what I could talk about is I've got a lot of experience with exploring, being curious about telling a story, and the challenge of digging into data systems that really aren't designed to tell stories. They're just designed to capture data. So if you're thinking about how to frame your experience, think of how it translates into not the product you're producing, but the work that you're actually doing. So if it's communicating a really highly technical theory, policy, or analysis, hit on the fact that you're communicating, not that you're able to necessarily do it, although I wouldn't hide that. But for state government, I think if you have the skills, if you can communicate with folks, if you can take on the challenges that the state will throw at you, if that's budget cuts or politicians making decisions, policy decisions that then impact what programs are being done. It's really challenging, but it's really fun to be surrounded by people who care. In terms of networking, it's not so much the coffees. I think that helps a little bit if you just know people in different agencies, in different positions. I think it is understanding what people are interested in. So if you do end up getting a job in state government, it's very easy to just do what you're assigned to. But if you kind of take a step back and look to see where the agency is going and say, it seems like they're interested in this direction, explore that as much as you possibly can and tell that to your peers and colleagues. And I think it's pretty easy if you have the skills and the desire and the communication to just kind of grow your career in state government. So I'm sure I missed most of the useful insight. And I think I'm down to like 15 seconds, but the other thing, Tyler mentioned this, is reach out to me. I think my contact information is available. Reach out to me if you have a cover letter or a resume you're interested in, or there's a job you're interested in with state government. I might not know anything about it, but I can at least tell you more about what the different positions and titles are and where they're situated in the agency. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, Peter. And I just want to echo what Tyler and Peter both said. I think everyone on this panel would be more than happy to, serve as a resource for folks to just help them translate their experience in the academy with what's out there in the labor market. I feel like that, like having that decoder ring is the biggest thing. And hopefully we're providing some of that insight here. So thanks, Peter. And thanks for setting the bar low in the middle of the panel. That's always appreciated. So moving on, have the joy of listening to Dr. Cindy Snyder, who I like to describe as someone who may be of interest to everyone here, since she was an academic boomerang, and she can speak about that, going to the non-academic labor market and then coming back into academy and then back out. And so Cyndy is currently a researcher at Microsoft in human resources, where she focuses on employee engagement, diversity, and well-being. Previously spent time in institutional research at Seattle University, and then as a research assistant professor in the Department of Family Medicine at the University of Washington, where she still maintains her affiliate status. So once we're back on campus, you can go look up Dr. Snyder. So Dr. Snyder, to get us started, can you just give me a little more color about your career journey from grad school to your current job?
Yeah, thanks. And thanks everyone for having me today. This is a super exciting panel, and I've enjoyed hearing everyone so far. I don't know what new I'll have to offer, but I will do my best. So just to kind of give a little bit of background. So I actually also did my PhD at UC Berkeley, which is kind of funny that there's somebody else on this panel, yay. Very interesting. But right after I finished, I actually had the opportunity to go to South Africa in Cape Town as a postdoc, and was studying higher education and student experiences, very similar to some of the work that I had done actually before going to grad school. But I knew that I would eventually be coming back to the States, and I wasn't necessarily set on being a faculty member at that point. So I found myself in, back in Seattle in a very similar role I was in before I went to grad school, which was doing higher education research and assessment. And so there I was at Seattle U and moved on to UW-Tacoma, mostly in the student planning area. But after doing that type of work for a couple of years, I really kind of had the itch again to do some more research and some deeper research, and also just figure out, what is life like outside of education. So focusing on studying education, because that's really what most of my career had been, was focused on higher education. So I applied and was actually fortunate enough to get a job as a research scientist in the Department of Family Medicine. I didn't necessarily have a background in health, but that's really where kind of my love of health and wellness meld. It kind of came together, and a lot of the work that I currently do is focused on health equity as well as health workforce. And so I think, that opportunity allowed me to go on to be a faculty member in that department. My audio.
You're back now, Cyndy. Oh, we lost you again.
Can you hear me? Okay, perfect. It sounds like you can hear me. Tell me if you can't. But I think, as I was saying, I was in the academic world. I love that space, but I was also very curious about what research looks like outside of academia and how people were doing research there. And so fortunate enough to stay connected to some of my colleagues. I think the theme that was running through a lot of this is staying connected with colleagues and relationships. And so staying connected with colleagues that I had before I went to grad school is actually how I ended up at Microsoft. So now my work is really focused on looking at employee well-being, employee experiences, and diversity in the workforce. And so again, those relationships were key in helping with that transition. And so I think now I've kind of built a way to do both. So I have the work that I do in industry at Microsoft, as well as maintain my affiliate faculty status, so I can keep my hands in the academic world and still collaborate with some of those faculty colleagues that I also know. So. And I think the other question is kind of building upon that, is thinking about how do you translate that work, your academic work, to a non-academic employment. And I think, it really depends on the type of role. So, are you thinking about a research role? Are you thinking about, working at a nonprofit or industry or some type of foundation? So definitely keeping that in mind and being able to speak to those types of roles will depend on how you kind of translate that. But also a couple different things. So thinking about, people have talked about this already, the skills that you develop in grad school, being able to translate those into more product-based and to kind of more actionable insights. But also thinking about those things that we have learned in grad school. We learn a lot of different skills. Which ones of those do you want to carry forward, right? People might not always want to do all of the things that they learn. Not everybody wants to write. Not everybody wants to do research. Some people might want to do project management. So how do you pay attention and kind of hone all of those things that you've learned, and then also tailor it to what you're most interested in? So that's definitely one big thing I would say in terms of translating those skills. And then one thing that I think was super important and key is actually keep a CV and a resume handy. And I say that for two reasons. One, your CV, which is kind of everything that you've ever done, all of the stuff that you're, all of your accomplishments, where you can keep track of all the great work you've done. But when you have to distill that down into something that's actionable or that resonates outside of academia, and you have to translate that into a resume. So taking a 10-page CV, for example, and putting it into a 2-page resume can be really daunting. If you've already done that and kind of been thinking about that while you're in grad school or along that path, it's much easier, and you can be much more responsive to people when you meet them and they ask you, or when a job comes up and they say, okay, send me a resume or send me your CV. You have both, so you can really be responsive to both of those areas. So those are kind of two things that I would think about in terms of applying the experiences that you're gaining in academia to the non-academic environment. And then, do you want me to speak to the last question? I think you had one more.
We have time. I'd love for you to do that, Cyndy.
Awesome. All right. So I think the last one was, people have talked about this one already, just kind of the relationships and the importance of building those relationships. I also am not somebody who likes to network, but I also recognize that relationships are key. And the other thing I would say is curiosity is also something to keep in mind when you're building those relationships. So, since I had a career outside of academia before, definitely keeping those relationships that I had there, but also keeping the relationships that you have in academia, because you never know where you're going to want to be in 10 years, how you're going to grow, how you're going to change, and who's really going to be there to help support you and help you in whatever transition you're wanting to go, whatever road you're wanting to go down. And then stay curious. I think, we've also talked about this in terms of just different networking events or conferences. There are people that are academics there, but there are a lot of people there that also are coming from foundations or research organizations, and just keeping that in mind and figuring ways to connect with them while you're in grad school may be a way to make a link with them once you get out, and also just learn about different types of roles. So that's that curiosity and learning and building relationships. So I think that's kind of my spiel for today and my background and what I have to offer.
Thank you, Cyndy. And one thing that you mentioned, I think is really important, I've kind of forgotten about this, is for so many of us, we worked tremendously hard to make our CVs 10 or 15 pages long, which is like this laundry list of everything we've done. And it is like an emotional response to just hack most of it into a resume, where like your publications don't matter, your conference presentations don't matter, that group you were participating in doesn't matter. And just like making it something like, which is like a series of bullet points, is just so difficult. And just like, I think that's great call out for folks, and also keeping both of them, right? Because nothing confuses a recruiter quite like submitting a CV for a job. They usually just delete you and move on. So for those of you who ever need help for things like that, feel free to reach out to someone. I think many of us would be happy to provide an example on how we've distilled that information. And so last but far from least, want to transition to Dr. Andre Stevens. So Andre recently received his PhD from the University of Washington Sociology Department just last year. As a graduate student, he interned as a quantitative user researcher at Google and as a data scientist at the D.E. Shaw Group. He has just, as of a couple months ago, rejoined D.E. Shaw as a full-time employee, and will be moving to New York whenever we get through this wretched pandemic. So Andre, I want to kick over to you a question to just kind of describe your career journey and how you got to your current position at Shaw.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to Rithi and Andrew and John for hosting this. I was very excited to join this panel because I too had many, many questions in my journey, and definitely benefited from the experience of various persons who gave me advice as I went along. So I consider this paying it forward. And as everybody else said, if you want to reach out to me, certainly do so. And I'll try my best to coach or give advice. You might detect a slight accent. I'm Jamaican. I came to the US as a foreign student on an F1 visa. Some of you who are attending this panel might also be international students. And I do want to speak about that a little bit towards the end, because I think there are some nuances that are worth considering if you want to sort of switch from academia into industry as an international student. But I came here, I was bent on going into academia, thought that was the path for me, got disenchanted with academia, and for various personal reasons also decided to jump ship. It was a very scary and daunting task. I still wasn't, I wasn't sure up until maybe a few months ago whether it was the right call, but I think it is. I came to start thinking about maybe moving into industry when I ran into a friend of mine who had recently graduated with a PhD in communications and had already gotten a job at Microsoft by the time he defended. And I was kind of, curious about, somebody with a PhD in communications, what the hell, would you be doing at Microsoft? He, as it turns out, is a user researcher. And it seemed like a very attractive opportunity. He had interned at Airbnb. I also knew somebody else who had done a sociology master's and then went to the human-centered design and engineering school for a second master's, and then did an internship with Airbnb and converted there. And so I did have some experience with folks who had sort of moved into tech. What I did was I made an error first that I think a lot of people tend to make, which is I started applying directly for jobs, full-time positions, and might have sent out 100 applications, and nobody got back to me, right? So that was like super disenchanting. And to cut a long story short, it turns out that in tech and in many industries, there's a pipeline for persons who are moving from academia to industry, and that requires you to first do an internship. And I think the big thing that people in industry want to know about you, and something that you really have to convey, is not necessarily that you're smart. I mean, if you're doing a master's or a PhD, or already ahead of the game in terms of qualifications on paper, so they'll think you're smart, be true or false. But the thing that they often are curious about is, are you able to project manage, and are you able to sort of context switch from being an academic to sort of being in industry? And it is a learning curve. It's something that I experienced at Google and in my current role, where things just move a lot quicker, and the sort of tendency to elaborate on things or to be like very careful and detail oriented can oftentimes fly out the window. Sometimes it's required, sometimes it isn't, and you just kind of have to judge and hone those skill sets as you go along. I can speak to a couple roles very briefly that I think folks might be interested in, which are data science and user research. And I think for social sciences, those tend to be the roles, if you're interested in, say, tech or finance, that might be most useful. By the way, so when I switched from, just doing random job applications to the internship pipeline, what I did was I just went on Reddit. It turns out that, computer science students especially think a lot about internships in tech and in finance, because it's just par for the course for them. And so you can actually detect a lot of information about what companies are looking for. It won't exactly be the same for you because you're not going into software engineering, but a lot of the product building side of it is very similar. And so what these companies want to know is that you have a really strong product sense. So you know how to take your training where you find research questions about social problems in the world and sort of apply that to problems that have to do with industry and products in particular. And so I sort of leaned on that resource a lot. I found a list of sort of a laundry list of companies that people tend to apply for every summer. And I just started applying to those companies. And so both Google and DSHA were on like lists that I saw. Recruiters reached out to me. I talked a lot to folks who had done it before, and I practiced a lot in terms of my interview skills and sort of trying to figure out what folks in the industry were interested in. If you're on the quant side, it's nice to have programming skills, Python and R. Brush up on your statistics and your probability. If you're on the qualitative side, again, developing that product sense that I mentioned is really important. Developing a familiarity with user research methods, which are very different from sort of the methods that we use in social sciences, but analogous in certain ways. And it also really helps if you have any kind of research background in tech specifically. I also was connected with the eScience Institute. I was a fellow there and did a data science internship. So that experience, I think, helped. The one thing I will say as a sort of final point here is the proof of the pudding is in the eating. What recruiters want to see is that you are able to do the work, right? And so to the extent that you can develop a portfolio that demonstrates your work, that's going to be a plus. So creating your own website that displays your work, if you're on GitHub or Kaggle or one of these types of sites, that also is something you can put on your CV or your resume in order to just demonstrate and just show recruiters, like, you want somebody who can run a regression analysis that gives you insights on, product metrics. Here are examples where I actually implemented that very thing that you want. You want somebody who can take amorphous product issues and turn them into a good research question and deliver insights about what users want from a product. Here's an example where I did that and it had value and it had an impact, right? And those are the types of things that I think will put you over the edge in terms of their attractiveness to your candidacy. The thing I want to mention briefly about international students is it is harder as an international student to transition, and you should be aware of certain pitfalls. So it's very expensive to sponsor international students. Very few companies do it. So you're talking about the sort of big companies in the tech and finance space who are willing to do that. So you want to make sure that if you're applying to a company, that they are willing to support you long-term, because just kind of doesn't make sense for you to work for a year, leave academia, and then are left with the being forced to sort of leave the US. And if you haven't made any contingency plans, that can be a big issue. You should also note that if you do a STEM degree, I don't know how many people here are, I gather most people here are social scientists, but folks who do a STEM degree get a 2-year extension to work after they finish their dissertation or master's. If you aren't doing a STEM degree, which is my case, you get a 1-year extension, and then you have to apply for the H-1B, which is the work permit. And that has become a lot more difficult because it's a lottery system, and the probability that you'd be selected is not very high. I think there are 85,000 slots a year, and there probably are easily 300,000 applications, right? So make sure that if you are going that route of industry, you are working with an employer who has hired a lot of foreign students before and is willing to at least send you abroad. There are ways you can go abroad for a year and then come back in the States on a different visa, although there are legal issues around that. But you definitely want to be aware that you're not quite in the same boat as somebody who is a US citizen or a permanent resident. And yeah, just ensure that you're above board in terms of your legal status. And that will be a sort of a big boon for you in the end. But it's definitely possible. I don't want to discourage people from doing it. It's just a little bit riskier.
Andre, thank you very much. And thanks for the added advice for international students. You're spot on. Places like, I know, at least when I had done the research, when I also worked at the state of Washington for a long time, or a long time ago for a short time, Microsoft was the biggest user of H-1Bs in the state, and I suspect still are. So there's definitely a lot of opportunities in the Seattle area. So thank you to all of our panelists. I think we're now at the question and answer phase. So if you have any burning questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A. I think we have a couple coming in. So I'm just going to start to ask a few of these of the panelists. Before I do, there's one thing I wanted to say that just kind of follow up on things from my perspective. I feel like it's good for graduate students to hear that the biggest change, and I'd welcome any insights from the panel, biggest change that I see from academia to the non-academic labor market is you currently are seeing, sometimes virtually, on a daily basis, like what is in the labor market a rarity, which is only people with master's degrees and PhDs, right? You are situated amongst people who are all, as Andre said, equally smart, right? And so what you kind of lose sight of in academia is that that is very much an aberration. So when you're in the labor market, you suddenly are switched, and it's really hard to get your mind around this at first. And this is the question and thing I'd welcome feedback from the panel on is, you're suddenly the expert in the room. You are the decider. You're the person, like, no one's going to come back at you and say, well, have you considered adding this variable to your model? Or what, are you sure you did that case study correctly? No, you're making the call, and people are running with your decision. And that's really tough sometimes to wrap your mind around, since you spend years getting beaten down, and in some ways in a good way, right? So you're more confident in the things that you're doing. But before we get to the general questions, I'd love any insights from the panel around, how do you feel suddenly being the expert in the room and the person who makes decisions sometimes for millions of dollars?
Well, since not everyone's jumping in, I'll field this really quickly. I think that there's certainly an added pressure that comes with that, with being the expert, with being the sole person that's providing the data or providing an analysis, and distilling that down to a few key takeaways, a few bullet points that will then go to an executive level person who makes a decision on how to spend those millions of dollars based off of the information that you've provided. And so while that comes with pressure, there's also some autonomy. You don't often have the time to collaborate in the way you'd like to. Sometimes you don't have months and months, as Peter alluded to. Sometimes these decisions are made in a day or two. And I think that your point, John, about being confident in your skills, you understand the data, the limitations, the caveats, the analytic framework better than a lot of people who aren't as close to the work, or who don't have the same skills that you bring to bear. And yeah, there will be mistakes, there will be errors, but I think that graduate school and academia prepares you to know what to look for, to assess the validity and the reliability of the data and the results that you're producing. I mean, even on their face, right? Like we have gained the skills to immediately see, like, that can't be right because just of what you know about data and statistics. So just leaning on your own technical skills and being confident in yourself, I think is key when you're in those pressure cooked, very, very quick turnaround situations.
And John, I'll jump in as well. I think I do want to emphasize, you've got to feel confident in your role. If you want your role to continue on, you've got to be confident in the decision making and the actions that you're taking. I would hesitate to say that I've seen more people stagnate in their careers if they rely solely on themselves, though, if they are so confident that they're not reaching out to others. So I would say, as soon as you make it out of academia and into your next position, you've got to have all the confidence in the world that you can make a smart, sharp decision, but never stop relying on other people to get input, to make sure you're not missing that major, section of the entire issue. I think someone in the comments mentioned something about interdisciplinary studies and stuff. It's kind of similar with the relationships. You don't want to be so focused on just your individual unit or role that you're making decisions at. You want to make sure you're reaching out to the other side of the industry, the communications team, the design team, whatever it might be, the program staff, who can get that insight so that you'll continue to not only expand your relationships and network, but understand the bigger picture even more.
Thank you. That's super helpful. I want to jump to another question that just came in. So for anyone on the panel, beyond writing and research, are there any specific skills that have proved particularly useful or sought after in your particular lines of work? Things like meeting facilitation, project management, and so forth. And I want to pick on Ligaya, Andre, or Cyndy for this one.
Would you mind restating your question?
Of course. So beyond writing and research, are there any specific skills that have proved particularly useful or sought after in your line of work?
I can jump in on that one. I think, when we think about research skills, we have to think about it broadly. So not just the statistical or data analysis, but the ability to communicate. And I think somebody mentioned that before. So how do you communicate those results? How do you make it understandable for a broader audience who might not have the same background or knowledge that you do? So I would say the communication skills are a key one. And then, just thinking about, and this might be things that you draw upon from before you were in grad school or other areas of expertise. So definitely soft skills, how do you interact with people? How do you build relationships? How do you solicit input to make those collaborations with different people? So I think those are two key ones, is your ability to collaborate and ability to communicate. And then, just thinking about what are some of the other things that you've had to do. So if you're carrying out a research project in and of itself, there's project management skills there. And so that might be something else that you're interested in or want to translate. There might be other administration type skills that might be relevant that you also want to translate into something outside of academia. So, an example would just be look at a job description, see what resonates with you, and then think about, how have I done that in my previous, either when I'm writing a paper, when I'm designing or carrying out a research project, when I've had to think or communicate with people about a really a deep topic or something like that. So yeah, those would be some of the key ones, but I'll let somebody else chime in as well.
Yeah, I think what I would add to that is thinking about what you enjoy. So, if you enjoy writing, that's awesome. That could be something that you could bring into other kinds of jobs. If you like teaching, then facilitating and, things like that are things that I think as academics, we often then become relied upon outside of the academy to bring into spaces. So things like that, thinking about, what is it that you like that are parts of what you might be doing now that could transcend the academy. And then looking for opportunities to then practice those things in other spaces to be able to build some of those relationships that we've been talking about.
Awesome. Thanks, Ligaya. And then as a follow-up, there's another question that, for those of you who are hiring managers, what skill do you look for in people? And I'm happy to start that off. I had a boss who said this is the key thing that he looks for, and I've found that it's the same thing for me, is you want someone who is curious and not afraid of challenges. You don't need someone who checks all the boxes on a resume, which I think is important to know as an applicant, that, folks are often scared of not meeting all 10 of the boxes, right? If you meet 5 of them, you should put it in, because most people might only meet 3, or you might have a compelling story. Like, definitely apply. I think Andre's experience of applying for 100 jobs and not getting them, don't be deterred by that. I applied for 200 and I got 2 interviews and got one of the jobs. You only need one. So just like put them out there, right? And just curious, anyone else who's a hiring manager, what do you look for when you're hiring folks?
I'll follow up. Curiosity, absolutely. I think that's a big one. And I also wanted to say, this might be challenging for some folks, but it is so much. I tend to hire quite a few data analysts or kind of supervisor positions, and especially the data analyst positions. When we post a position and we get 40, 50 applicants, it is painful to read through them because so many of the applicants look very similar on paper. But if an applicant has reached out to me, email, telephone, just to, hey, I want to ask some questions about the position, I want to know what you're looking for, it is so much easier to read through a resume, a cover letter with that conversation in my mind to say, like, oh, this is where this conversation is coming from. So I would say, feel comfortable that, yes, if you check off a couple of the boxes, apply for it, but also reach out first. See if you can establish that connection up front. Show some form of curiosity, of ask what type of questions the hiring manager might be interested in finding out to see if it aligns with what you want to do. And then always go in knowing that as much as you might want the job, you've got to figure out if it's a position you'd want and the folks are interested in, if you're interested in working for them. So.
Thanks, Peter. And if there's any other questions, I think we may have opportunity for any other, like last question or any final comments from our panelists before we wrap. I know we're a couple minutes over.
Yeah, I would just say be persistent. There's a lot of disappointment along the way, but I think John said it very aptly. You only need one. Develop a thick skin and just keep trying, keep trying.
Yeah, and I think for all the graduate students, you're used to being rejected on your drafts of your theses, by journals. Just get back out there. Your persistence has prepared you for the labor market. So I think with that said, I think we're going to pass the mic back to Riddhi.
All right, great. Thank you so much. On behalf of the Harry Bridges Labor Center, I'd like to thank John for his excellent moderating skills and to Andrew for all the Zoom technical skills behind the scenes, and our esteemed panel. We know that you're all very, very busy and very much appreciate you making the time to share your experiences with us all. And last but not least, thank you all to all the attendees. We'll be sending you a survey requesting your feedback on this panel and also to get some thoughts on what you'd like to see on future career panels as well. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it. All right, take care.